Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. You may have noticed we didn't have our usual intro today. I have decided to simplify things here on the podcast, and I want to be able to record these and get them out quicker. So today is one attempt to do that. We are now in our third week of major protests that have erupted in wake of the murder of George Floyd. It's nothing new in this country to have police brutality and then have protest against it, but this time really does feel different. And it's not just protests here in this country. They have been happening all over the world. And to me, and I know to many of you, that is really inspiring. And I really hope that this becomes a movement for real positive change, that it stays mostly peaceful, and that real good comes of it, because there are so many things that are in need of reform right now. Our country, our world, they really are in trouble. Like, it's not an exaggeration to see that as being more true now than it was, 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. And we would be astray if we believe the narrative being pushed by some that these protesters are all violent or all criminals, or that somehow all the protests, in Minneapolis came from outside the state. No, it's ridiculous. In fact, the vast majority of people participating at these protests have been completely peaceful. There has been some civil disobedience, like blocking traffic, which is a non-violent way to have civil disobedience. And then unfortunately there was violence, but as we all know, that came both ways. The police were, videotaped antagonizing at times. So I hope that the movement goes forward in a more peaceful way, and also one that, again, leads to change, in November, it leads to reform. All of this is completely irrelevant to today's podcast, which is with EdWord Galan. I was really happy to get to have him on. And at the end of the podcast, he kind of flipped the script on me and asked me what I think about things, and so what I think needs to be changed. So if you listen to the end, you can hear more of my own thoughts there. EdWord was born in the Dominican Republic and emigrated to the United States with his family when he was 7 years old. And I think this really helps give him a unique perspective on some of these issues like race, racism, other social justice issues. He actually follows far-right groups on Facebook and Twitter and places like that, and will dialogue with them. So I consider him to be very open-minded. He sees things with a different perspective. And part of the reason why I wanted to have him on the podcast is he is critical of the left in ways that I think is really important and warranted. He points out some of the ways that some of the social justice dialogue issues will drive people away. Some of the reasons why he sees the Democrats losing election after election, and whether you agree with them or not, that's clearly been what's happening of late in our country. So I hope you enjoy getting to hear his perspective on what's been going on. He's talking to us from Boston, and I hope wherever you are safe and well. And without further ado, I bring you EdWord Galan. And I'm here today with EdWord Galan. Am I saying that right?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you for being on the podcast. It's crazy times we're in.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
And you're in Boston right now? Are you like downtown Boston?
In Boston, Boston proper, little neighborhood called Jamaica Plain.
Okay.
A little bit outside of downtown, but pretty close.
Great. Yeah, and we met at Naropa University. You were studying there, and stayed in touch a little bit since you moved. It just seems like the world has changed so much in the last few months.
Yep.
So you were just saying before we started recording that coronavirus hit Boston harder than the rest of the country. I know it hit New York City a lot. That's been in the news a lot, but I haven't heard as much about Boston.
Yeah, it wasn't anywhere like on the level as New York City, but it was a lot. It was a lot of cases. I think we had like a couple people that came for a conference in Somerville or something like that. I can't remember, and they spread. That's like one of the first cases that we tracked and kind of spread from there. Yeah, so we're kind of like still opening things up slowly because we're on the same stage of like, oh, okay, this is kind of over. We're over this. That other places in the country are. We're still kind of slowly, assessing the situation and seeing if it's safe. But things are beginning to normalize a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about. I think it seems like a lot of areas in the country didn't really get that affected by it. And so there's been people doubting, at first I think they were taking it seriously, and now, like, generally speaking, are like questioning that. And here in Colorado, some people are still taking it seriously in terms of coronavirus, and some people much less so. But it's good to hear from someone who, you're in an area where you really saw it. Like, you're not denying that it's a real disease. Because I'm getting all kinds of conspiracy theories thrown at me all the time, and it seems undeniable. It's a real thing that, people have died from it and it deserves some amount of attention. But maybe we, generally speaking, overestimated the impact it would have, or maybe it still will have a big impact. I can't really tell. It's hard to tell.
It is hard to tell. It really is. I think that, a lot of the things that they were taking kind of affected vulnerable populations a lot more than others, and a lot of people, certain populations, it just probably just passed over them and they didn't even realize they had it. So really, kind of a mixed bag. It's hard to really. I could see why it would be hard for people to take it serious or believe that it's like as serious as it was. I definitely know people that passed away from it. I know a lot of people that were very sick from it for a while. So it was definitely something that passed through, and it was different than just a regular flu.
So you personally know people who died from it?
Yeah. Just my work. A lot of us with the elderly population. So yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then, well, before we jump in farther, do you want to share a little bit more about your background and what you're up to?
Sure. Background is I was born in Dominican Republic. I came to the United States as an immigrant.
You were like 7 or something, if I remember.
Yeah, about 7, almost 7. I'm interested in a lot of things. I would say some of my main interests are music and dance, holistic health, and politics. I'm really into that. So we met at Naropa, where I was finishing my undergrad, and I really took that time. Trump got elected right, during my first or second semester at Naropa, and it was then that I realized that I wanted to take a deep dive into studying and look into understanding conservatives and the right wing. I sort of during that time decided that there were things that the left and people that I was in line with politically were doing that and were giving negative results, and I was wasn't totally aware at first what those things were, but as I kind of dove into that journey, I just discovered a lot of things that I think we're overlooking. And I feel like that's been a lot of my focus pretty much since Trump's election.
You're you're breaking up a little bit. How does it sound on your end? I'm concerned about the recording.
Oh, it sounds fine. I don't hear any breakup.
So that's interesting. I'm curious, like, what was do you remember, like, what emotions or what was going on in your mind when Trump got elected? Because that was such a shock. And I remember being with a couple friends, and one of them started to cry. I mean, obviously we're more on the other end of the political spectrum. And then for me, one kind of weird positive that came out of it was like, I was like, man, anything is possible, because it was so unexpected, you know? And
Yeah. For me, it was almost like, you know, like if you're in a movie and like you see like, and not that Hillary Clinton is the good guys, but it really did feel like the villain, the bad guy won, you know? Like you're entering like a new part of the movie where like the bad guys have taken over and they're in control now, and now it's like you're part of the rebel force. I really did feel that from day one. Like I was just like, holy shit, like this is, you know, and one of the things that was so concerning to me was that it happened despite the bubble around me there was no Trump signs to be found. There was no sign at all around my bubble that this was even possible.
Right.
And you know,
here in Boulder, and like, but that speaks to how our country is divided. And we live in these separate bubbles. It's not just here, you know. But one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the podcast is I've experienced you as having an open mind, engaging with people whose opinions you disagree with, but you'll still talk to them, try to understand. And you've also been critical of some of the stuff on the left, because like what you were just saying, like there's things that the Hillary Clinton Democrat left have been doing. Like there's a reason why Trump won, you know, there's a reason why they're going the way they're going. Right.
There's a word that gets thrown around a lot. It's gaslighting, right? It's like when you try to tell somebody that, you know, it's like, why are you upset? Why are you angry? Like, I didn't do anything. Nothing happened here. You're making things up. And I feel like all sides are kind of doing that to each other, you know? There are legit concerns on both sides. There's illegitimate concerns on both sides. You know, the thing that I'm coming from a place of like looking at just the human condition, and looking at the fact that people are not people are very tribalistic. Everybody has bias, and essentially, in order to be aligned with truth, you have to be aware of that, and you have to sort of like essentially be teamless. You know, I can't side with, you know, if I'm only rolling with team, I don't know, the resistance, hates Trump, I'm not gonna, if Trump does something good, I won't even be able to recognize it, because I'm so you know, I just have blinders on to anything that's happening that goes contrary to the narrative, the dominant narrative in my group. And
it's like you can't see reality then, because you're looking through such a strong lens.
Yeah. And for me, you know, I always tell people, I think this desire for objectivity and to side with truth and not groups comes from a lot of it comes from my experiences as a kid. One of the more powerful ones is, I was bullied in 4th grade, and I just remember how strange and infuriating and crazy it was to see a group of people that didn't even know me. Like, I was new at this school, but they just all ganged up on me based on just me being new, being an outsider to the group, and how they would say again.
Was this after you moved to America? United States?
This is after I moved to America, a couple, maybe 3 or 4 years into being here. And I imagine probably my English wasn't very good, and I'm an immigrant. I'm still adapting to this country, so I'm sure there were a lot of reasons why those kids were being so mean to me. But what was astounding to me was just, like, I remember we would be playing a game, and yeah, and I remember I would get people out. Like, I would, hit their square, and the ball would go out, and if, like, the popular kid said, "No, it didn't hit. It hit the line. You're actually out." Like, all of them in unison would all go on his side, and, like,
oh wow, yeah,
and
example of the little children, and then we see that same dynamic as adults.
yeah, and it was just so maddening. Like, I was just like, wow, like, you hate me so much that you're willing to just put aside the fact, like, willing to put aside fairness. For me, games and competition were always something that I always had a lot of honor when it came to games. Like, I just, like, I would feel terrible if I, like, lied to beat somebody. And so I just remember that affected me really deeply. Like, wow, these kids would all lie there and take this kid's side just to hurt me. And you see that all the time in politics, lies of what people say, lies that involve what they omit. If you're only listening to one side or the other, you're getting, like, half of the story. For instance, like, I mean, this might be a little controversial to say, but, like, I just watched a video yesterday, because one of the things that I do is I actually straight up follow white supremacist pages on Facebook,
Okay.
Twitter, also, I mean, Instagram is kind of apolitical for me, but yeah, I follow, I watch YouTube videos by people in the alt-right.
Wow.
And it was interesting. This guy, I rarely comment, except to maybe occasionally just to, like, I'll question something that they say, just to inject a little bit of discourse. But I'm not really, like, expecting to have, like, productive discourse when I enter those pages. I'm just, like, just to, like, kind of throw something in there. And sometimes I'm just curious what people will say. No, and for instance, like, I'm really curious how someone would justify, like, what happened to George Floyd. Like,
right.
I feel like it's unjustifiable. But it was interesting. Like, they had this guy said something that was super racist, whatever. So I looked at his page, and he had a video. It was like a video camera from a store, and it captured kind of like was arrested. He was actually, like, kind of, like, across the street from, like, the video that we see where he's, like, by the cop car and he's on the floor. That's actually, like, a slightly different location from where everything started. It was kind of like crossing the street where it started.
Is this someone's cell phone?
No, this was a video camera, a surveillance camera from one of the stores.
Okay.
And I didn't watch the video super closely, but some people were saying, oh, look, at this point, he's like dropping a baggie of drugs. And it definitely looked suspicious. Like he might have been, previous to the interaction with cops, he might have been involved in some kind of like selling drugs or something. We don't know. It looked a little sketchy, whatever.
What about it looked sketchy? I haven't seen this video you're talking about.
Yeah, it was just like they were in a car and like people were like coming in and out of like this car. You know, like if you're just like talking to people, you would kind of deal with them like on the street if you're not doing anything wrong. But if you're kind of like trying to hide things,
okay,
probably like go into each other's car. I don't know. Who knows? It does, at the end of the day, you know, let me just be clear. None of this justifies what happened.
Absolutely.
But this is the type of information that's emitted from liberal circles and people that want to push the narrative that George Floyd was just, you know, innocent person that died at the hands of cops, because they're not trying to inject any kind of doubt or questioning into their narrative. And and I get it. And at the same time, I feel like it ends up doing a disservice, because if you don't talk about it, what happens is that these white supremacists actually turn that around and say, oh, look, they're ignoring this, and the mainstream media and these people want to ignore it, so therefore, you know, and it leads to all sorts of like speculation and things like that. They're not, you know, the other thing that came out that these racists were talking about was the fact that I guess George Floyd had coronavirus, and he also had like another underlying condition that made it so that he was more susceptible to, you know, to things. But anyways,
but that's so
so that's the kind of shit that they will find to focus on.
Well, I really appreciate that you do that and you follow these groups and engage. And I think your point, like the onus of responsibility on the so-called mainstream media should be a lot higher than some guy posting on Facebook, right? So if there are other things, they should cover that. And when they don't, it really does work to their disadvantage. And at the same time, the response to this killing, at least in part, maybe in large part, like the video is so clear, like this was so wrong. Like no one can, how you could watch that video and not see how wrong that is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like we need to do like what you're doing, like you're looking at the other side, or you're looking at different perspectives, you're engaging with them. And, but yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say about it.
Yeah. And I think that I don't think that everybody is capable of doing what I'm doing, to be quite frank. I think, you know, I have a way of detaching my emotions at times when I'm looking at information. And I feel like for some people, some of these things are so emotionally charged that even just exposure to it would just kind of drive them wild, you know,
right.
And I get that. I'm not expecting everyone to do what I do.
Takes security and some like consciousness to figure out, to hold yourself a little bit apart from what you're seeing. Sounds like.
Yeah. You know, there's good and bad to having that quality, to be honest. I feel like sometimes it takes me a while to connect to how I feel emotionally about things. I mean, it does for everybody, but I don't know, sometimes just like something like this happens and I'm sort of just like digging information and thinking about it like from a theoretical standpoint instead of like just feeling my emotions, which I think is also important. So there's advantages and disadvantages to every approach.
Good to have both, because it's a little bit a way of defending yourself, or like you don't always want to be in a real emotional state, but to also be honest For me, I have found, maybe not as much as you, but I've tried to do this where I look at different perspectives and engage with people, and occasionally I'll find myself going down a rabbit hole online.
Yeah.
And when I get really sucked in, I'll start to lose, like, it becomes difficult. Like, what do I actually think or believe? And I'll just come to this place of like not knowing, and I'll kind of be like, I don't know what the truth is. I'm just going to investigate. But I think this really speaks to where we are in society, in our world today. We're in this age of information. There's so much information out there, and people are inhabiting very different universes in their minds about what's true. And if I go down a rabbit hole with someone, it's like, in order to keep going down that rabbit hole, you have to keep suspending things that I had already believed were true. And it can be very confusing, and it can be challenging. And I think the average person, like, we don't have time and energy, that we can't figure it all out. Like, when you start mistrusting mainstream narratives, and there's good reasons for that, but then it can become very like ungrounding, and you're just like, what is actually going on?
Absolutely.
And with coronavirus and now the protests, it's just like, it's a confusing time.
Yeah, that's another reason I have a lot of compassion for people who are doing the things that I'm criticizing, which is just too many things to entertain. I mean, imagine just going down every rabbit hole, exploring every conspiracy theory. You know, almost all these conspiracy theories have some element of truth, right? But then you have to, you know, sort of filter out truth and lies, and again, omission, and what is the agenda. And honestly, it's a lot. It's too much. I mean, about it, you're like, what I want to say about this is that it's all emotional. A lot of it is emotional, right? It comes from like, you know, this desire to, I think some people are in this very fearful place. I feel like, yeah, like what you said is true. It's very confusing, and people just don't have the time, energy, the mental bandwidth, you know, to deal with it all. And unfortunately, people with particular agendas are using that confusion, and inserting, you know, bad faith arguments and bad faith, and it's just, yeah, it's a crazy time. And I don't know if about you, but I've been surprised by the people who start believing this stuff too, like really outrageous conspiracy stuff. And you know, it's like some people are just, it's almost like some people are just like, for the first time, like like questioning when it comes to dealing with this type of environment. It's people in a serious way.
Yeah, and I think Trump's election really has accelerated all these trends, because he's questioning science, and mainstream media constantly attacking them, making them into the boogeyman. But then how do we know what's going on? Like, is it just some, you know, it's just, there's people on YouTube getting millions of views, and they're just speculating. They're just kind of making things up. And it's disturbing to see that.
Yeah.
It's definitely impacted some friendships that I have, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that you believed Hillary Clinton was a satanic child abuser. Can we, like, how do I understand this? You know, it's just like,
yeah,
you can definitely cut people off from each other.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, you know, I'm a big believer in, I really do believe that the truth sometimes is stranger than fiction. And I do think that there might be truth to some of these conspiracy theories again. But, you know, there's a difference. This takes a lot of, I think this is the maturity that I've gained through having been through this, like, for many, many years, is essentially being able to, like, on the one hand, hold that maybe there's truth to this, maybe these things are real, and at the same time not get, not almost like not until you really have solid evidence. I don't know if that makes sense. It's sort of like, I suspect that somebody, if it, I don't know, it's like you got to basically prioritize what it is that you concern yourself with, what you're giving your attention and emotions to, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm allowing, like, oh my God, like Hillary might be a, you know, satanic child molester, and I'm not really sure of that. I have no way to verify this, but I'm just getting like so angry about it. It's really like a waste of my energy, really. There's actually real things happening right now, like George Floyd being murdered in front of all of us. That's real. We saw that we can channel that energy and that anger towards, because that really happened, and all of us can agree on that.
Right.
And
well, I think information is like food, and you can have a really shitty information diet, just like you can have a really bad, diet of food. And it's like, what are we taking in? And like, just to wrap up the Hillary Clinton example, like my friend was talking about it, and I was like, maybe there's truth to the corruption. When it surprised me at all, maybe there's truth that she didn't have always good motivations or this or that. But then it like took this quantum leap to this whole other level. And I have to preserve my own kind of integrity. Like, I guess that's possible, but I have no evidence that I've ever seen to believe that. So, yeah. But yeah, I think your point is well taken, and the emotionality can be good, but it's like, is that productive? Are you getting really worked up around something that might not even be true? Whereas this video of George Floyd, like, that's obviously true. That obviously happened. So it's just a moment. I guess to jump more into that, it's like things have shifted since that happened. And it's interesting because it's not the first time something like that's happened. And unfortunately, it probably isn't the last time. But for whatever variety of reasons, this time it really feels different. It really does. I'm not just saying that.
Yeah. It is, man. And I think, obviously, the pandemic has a lot to do with that. People being at home and being exposed to, so much more news and information, and then it was like 3 or 4 like different murders that kind of in pretty close to each other. There were some other cases in other places, and like, I think you never know. I think with revolutions, people try to predict and say, okay, this is going to happen, but it's not that simple. You never know what's really going to set people off. It's too dynamic of a thing to really fully predict. Although I did see a video recently about some guy who apparently created a model where he predicted that 2020 was going to be the year that uprisings and stuff. So maybe we'll get there where we can predict stuff like this, but it seems pretty unpredictable to most people. It seems like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the things we've talked about in the past too is like you have a kind of unique or at least different perspective on a lot of this because of coming from Dominican Republic. How does I don't even know how to ask the question, but like, do you have anything about that you want to share that maybe your experience has been different than a lot of people in this country who were born and raised here?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways in which my experience allows me to react in a different way. Even though I'm Black, in terms of like my skin, I've taken on that identity since I moved to the United States. But at the same time, I do have this other this other identity, which is being Dominican, and I call myself mostly identify as Afro-Latino. And I don't think that, I think that African Americans in this country are subjected to a sort of like, there's a psychic weight that is really hard to describe and get people to like empathize with, especially if you're white. But it's real, and it's heavy. And I've had, even though I'm Black and I've been educated about racism since like starting in middle school, really, is when, like, maybe even earlier, like 5th grade, when I had to do, I remember I did like a project on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in 5th grade, and had to write an essay on them. And yeah, you know, since that time, I've sort of been aware of racism and the problems that we have here. And it's never been to the side and like, I don't want to think about that or whatever. It's been since that time, since like it was brought up, it was something that I like sort of embraced and was like, wow, what is this about? Like, I got curious about it. But I also, again, don't experience it in the same way as an African American. It doesn't, I really do think that there's a difference in the weight of what happens that is different for an African American than someone who was an immigrant who's coming from another country.
Interesting.
And that's actually a hard thing to really describe. I don't even know. I don't know what it is. I just know that, you know, even when you talk to Black people, when we go elsewhere, so we go to Europe, we go to Asia, people will often talk about how they just feel different. They feel liberated. They feel like something has been lifted off their shoulders. Really interesting podcast that I heard recently was this woman who moved to France, and she said that one day she went to go see a movie with another Black friend, and you know, she was used to interacting with white people in a certain way in America, and like she was kind of like, let's say, ghetto. Like she grew up in like the hood in New York City, and she said, like, you know, she would have this attitude like, yeah, I'm gonna like straight up punk these white people. So she went to she like cut a bunch of people, like went towards the front of the line, and she was just expecting like the white people there to sort of like, you know, silently like seethe in anger and just like allow her to do whatever she wanted to do. And she said that the French were not having it. They were like, you know, get out of here. Well, what are you doing? They're, you know, we saw you cut. Like they like in unison just like attacked her and her friend.
Oh, that's such an interesting example. I wasn't expecting it to go there.
Yeah. And she said, and she was talking about how she was actually relieved by that, because these people actually saw her and treated her as just another human being, and had the same expectations as they would for any other person that was there. And they didn't fear her. There wasn't this fear. Wow. And that is really deep, man.
That is a fascinating example. So I'm imagining if that happened here in the United States, like people might not say anything, but they would be thinking and feeling resentment or anger or fear, and that builds up. And like, I think that's just, it's fascinating.
That's, you know, and that's the environment that's been created, especially with like political correctness and, you know, the social justice movements, is this environment of essentially, you know, it's always anything that's punching up, fair game. You can say whatever you want, but anytime that you want to say anything to people that are of lower status, let's say in society, then you have to keep your mouth shut, especially if you're white.
Right.
And people kind of promote this culture as like, this is a form of justice. I call it social reparations. It's like, oh my goodness, like black people have had it so bad, you know, we need to do something. And instead of giving us money, they're like, we're going to just be really, really nice to them and allow them to get away with everything. You know, like, it reminds me of like the parent who, like, you know, is not there for their kids.
Right.
Actually, let me not go. That's a bad example. But anyways, it's a really interesting dynamic. And then you have like white people who just go so hard for defending and kind of like shielding black people, and they just go so hard that they're like more militant than even black militants. Like, they're just like, you know, there's so much anger. And something that I feel like isn't often talked about is how people sort of like okay, let me explain it this way. Yeah. I used to be a Christian, and like a fundamentalist Christian. Like, I'm talking about like going to church 3 times a week, like God, you know, gay people are going to hell, like, you know, all of that. And I remember after I left Christianity, I had a really hard time sort of coming to terms with my past, with who I was. And for a long time, I couldn't really talk about Christianity without getting really angry at Christians and just like thinking, oh my God, how stupid can these people get? Like, and what I was doing was, all that anger that I felt at myself for having been that person, I was just like now like projecting onto people that were still Christians.
Right. That's a good example. It's a personal example. So like the anger around that you were judgmental and judging people so much.
Yeah. And I recognized that. And it was one of the big reasons why I didn't speak that much publicly about my experiences as a Christian, because I actually recognized that like, if my goal was to talk to people about Christianity and get them to maybe see the error in their ways and maybe consider other religions and other points of view, if I was coming at them from this very angry place, I wasn't going to achieve my goal.
Right. And
so that made me question myself. And I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I went through that whole process. And I still have a lot of anger towards Christianity and everything. But I've come a long way, I think, with that. And I see a similar dynamic with white people who are just kind of becoming woke about on social justice issues. It's like they're so mad that they were once these people who like knew nothing about racial justice and everything. And now they know a little something, and they're just like, you know, basically like flexing their superiority and flexing like how much they like now are know, and they're in the know now. So like, and they want to police other people, how other people think and how other people, what they say. Right. And it's a really unhealthy dynamic, man. I see it all the time. Like, I went to a protest on Thursday, and it was interesting. There were reporters kind of walking around, interviewing a bunch of people, and mostly they were interviewing kind of people that kind of were taking leadership, like people that were leading chants and people that were sort of in the front of the protests. And at one point, the reporter stopped and started interviewing an older white man. And then like a woman behind me was like, white people shouldn't talk to the police, shouldn't talk to the press. White people don't talk to the press. And she just kept saying that. And my thought process was like, who assigned you to make these rules?
Yeah.
Like, who you and first of all, and it's not fair because like the reporters really were asking very diverse group of people. I saw them mostly talking to young people, but they were going around and just talking to the people that were there, and it was just like, I don't know. I hate when people don't think for themselves and they just like are taking on, maybe she heard that at another protest from somebody, and now she thinks like that is like the dogma now. White people shouldn't talk to the press. I don't know. It just seems like a stupid, arbitrary rule. Like, you get the sentiment behind it, but like, I don't know. It just seems like a bad way to enforce it.
Yeah, it's shaming people and asking them to be quiet, and that builds up resentment. I think that I really appreciate you naming that. It's tricky to talk about, but it's like that just example at the movie theater is going to stay with me, because if you, as a society, are not enforcing like politeness, norms, decency equally, then it actually encourages that kind of negative part of someone. If I could get away from jumping to the front of the line because of the color of my skin, like whatever color that is, like that's not going to make up for the past, and it's not going to help people in the present. But there is some version of that tends to happen on the far left, and asking white people to be quiet. I've seen it on Instagram this last week. It's like please don't post anything unless it's directly supporting the protest or people of color. Yeah, and I get the sentiment of it. And I've kind of been trying to follow that too, actually. But I really think that you're making an important point about it. I'm not sure what to add, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just with the thing that social justice people need to understand is that as you restrict people, right? As you try to control, especially when you're controlling people's actions and their speech. There comes a point in time where, like, let's say you say to somebody, okay, don't call me this, don't call me the N-word. That's a very reasonable request, okay? But then when you start adding like, not just that, but you need to do this, and you need to do that, and if you do that, you're racist, and if you do this, you're also racist. And like, this is problematic, that's problematic. Comes a point in time where there's diminishing returns on your efforts. And what you're doing essentially is you're creating an environment where people don't see any space for redemption. They don't see any space to be themselves, their flawed self. They don't see space for their voice, right? At all. And it starts to become, it feels unfair, starts to feel unfair. And I've literally heard people's their defense of this is like, well, Black people have been feeling this for hundreds of years, so welcome to the club, white people. You know what it feels like. And that it's just not, it's not a way forward. It's not a way forward.
Not very inspiring.
It really is. It really is kind of like just continuing the cycle of violence, right? You were bullied, now you're gonna bully. And so you have people like Trump who and white supremacists, right? Like the narrative that they push, and I'm seeing why people, the narrative they push is that these people, when they take control, they're gonna kill us. They're gonna put us, they're gonna throw us all in jail for having the wrong, misgendering somebody or something like that. And obviously, that is, because that's what groups do. But I think that there is sort of like a real, I understand it from an emotional level. Like if you just see uh, your side being silenced, and this dynamic of this power dynamic of things being reversed, it's going to concern you. And particularly if you are a person who is high on social dominant in their social dominance orientation, which is something I talk about a lot. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some complex issues. So this phenomena of, I guess, white guilt, or the guilt, shame, and if it's coming from a place of wanting to make the world better, having regret around the past, I mean, those are all good, but feeling a lot of shame and guilt, I think I just really question the value of that after a while. And it's like, I don't think people of color really want a bunch of people to feel bad. They want the situation to change. They want justice. They want a fair system. They want more political representation. They want police reform. They want prison reform. I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm seeing. I mean, that's what I want too. So it's like, how do we move that forward? And I really hope these protests lead to that. I really do.
Yeah, I definitely, I want to see white people empowered and using, not checking their privilege, using their privilege to make a change, you know? I mean, checking their privilege too, but everyone needs to do that. But I really think that what's important to me is to see people in their power. And I feel like when we're kind of playing the guilt and shame game, we're disempowering people. And I just feel like it's not productive. It makes it creates an environment where like I said, people are just not being real. They're not really expressing to you what they really think, who they really are.
Right.
And that's really a problem, man. Like, I don't want to be around fake people. I don't want,
I think that's a huge
fake
problem.
allies.
Right. Like, honesty, I think, is huge. Authenticity. I think it's undeniable that at least part of what we saw with the election of Donald Trump is millions of Americans telling the pollsters that they're going to vote one way, and then when they get into the poll booth, they vote another way. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, which is like, if you're shamed and torn down and feel this resentment and you feel like you can't say anything about it, I think that's at least part of the dynamic that is actually empowering Trump. It's actually empowering this more militarized response. It's empowering this narrative of dividing us and fighting each other.
Yeah, you have to see the power dynamics are this, like, white supremacy is real, and white supremacy is the dominant view. Let's just say that. And so, in order to combat that, you have to be kind of cunning and wise. If you come at something that is more powerful than you in a combative way, in a antagonistic way, there's a good chance you're gonna come out you're gonna come out hurt. And so something that I always mention when I speak about these issues is there's a number of responses to how we deal with. I mean, often this is talked about when we're talking about trauma, and there's fight, flight, friend, or freeze. And I think that for the most part, most people in the social justice left are more. A lot of the voices are kind of like in the fight mode, right?
Right.
And it's a valid tactic. Like through the rioting and all the violence that's happened, like so much change has happened just in the last week.
Yeah.
Okay. So like we've had like people are talking about defunding police departments. People are going to jail. Policy is going to be changed on a lot of local levels, but also maybe federally at some point because of this. Like change is happening. Fighting is important. It's an important response. I think that fighting is also the most volatile of all those responses, right? Because you can only be in fight mode for so long.
It uses a lot of energy, but
it uses a lot of energy, and
I think it's a valid thing.
Yeah, it uses a lot of energy, like you said, and also people have it creates a lot of chaos, and people have a very low tolerance for it. You see this dynamic that's playing out now, where you have a lot of people who really support what's happening, but they're like, you gotta stop looting. You gotta stop looting because that's too much. And I get that, right? That is understandable. And then you have other people who are like, oh no, like if you're even talking about the looting, you're missing the point, and this or that. And I feel like that's not respectful to the folks who see the looting and see kind of the error in that. Like, yeah, we really need to, like, despite something bad happening, right? And we still can't just, like, if we go around looting, hey, we're gonna have chaos. And I think that we may get to a point where that's the response, but I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we have to go there yet, you know? And I think that there's a lot of room for these other responses. I don't know about freeze, but I haven't thought about that response too much, but I definitely think that, you know, people should think about different ways to deal with this situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the fight response has been good. I think that is a little bit different than the shaming that we were just talking about before.
Yeah,
but I think also, yeah. I mean, so I think the shaming people is not helpful, or maybe it can be if it's done really skillfully. But too much control over what someone says, getting too caught up around like the words you use or stopping someone to talk, I don't think that's helpful. But I also thought about like some of the response to the looting has been similar to that story of the person jumping to the front of the line. You know, why can't we treat everyone as humans, and that's wrong? And then the thing I want to say about that is like distinguish people who are looting from people who are peacefully protesting. And what we've seen in the last week and a half now is like peaceful protesters getting assaulted by police on a mass scale across the country. It's absolutely outrageous. That's different than people who are looting. So you can justify police coming to arrest someone who's looting, but you can't justify our right to assemble, our right to protest. That's our constitutional right.
Yeah. So. I want to ask you this, Julian. How would you respond if... Do you have siblings, by the way?
I have two brothers. Yeah.
So if you found out that your brothers went to protests and like they're there and they're, you know, they're there to support the you know, the protest, but they're also like breaking into stores and like going in there and stealing shoes, like how would you feel about them? Like what would you say to them?
Oh man, I would feel ashamed, to go back to that word, and I would feel angry, and I would feel kind of outraged and shocked, and they would feel really wrong, and I would probably be embarrassed. I wouldn't want people to know that. And then I would, honestly, when you ask that question, I mean, I'm white, my two brothers are white, so somehow that does make a difference to me. Like if it somehow seems much more justifiable for a person of color, a black person to do something like that than for them to do that. I don't know if that's, I mean, if I think about it logically and ethically, I think it's wrong to loot and break a store for anyone, but that's my like gut emotional response.
Yeah. And I think that, The reason I ask that is because I really feel like one way in which we show each other love and help each other is by having high expectations for each other. And I know that if it was my family member, I would be pissed. Like, I would be really angry at them. And I say, like, what are you doing? That's embarrassing. Like, don't go, like, don't use this chaos to, like, go steal shoes. Like, that's ignorant.
Right.
And
great point.
And I feel like part of how racism, I don't even want to call it racism. I just feel like racism is a word that's too, we could say it's a form of racism, but let's just say it's a form of not holding, white liberals don't hold people of color to high standards. And basically, that creates a situation where people think it's okay that they are, it's not that they think it's okay, it's just like you're not nudging them, you're not pushing them to be better. Okay?
It's a great point.
And I see, a place where I saw this dynamic a lot, actually, was in education. You know, I don't know if in the inner cities, a lot of these schools, the vast majority of teachers are like young white women between the ages of 25, 35, right?
They're like Teach for America kind of thing.
Yeah. And they're working with like these populations of kids who are, kids of color, and like they're rowdy. They're kids, they're coming with all sorts of issues. Classroom management, especially when you're talking about middle school, high school, it's rough. It's really rough. And I would hear stories from, my friends who are white, who were like substitute teachers or whatever, of how they would just get steamrolled by these kids and they didn't know what to do. And
that's so fascinating.
And in part is because they were operating from this place of fear, right? Oh, like, I'm white, I don't have any room to question. I don't know what these kids' lives are about, so therefore I have no place to criticize or
like disciplining the children like they would normally do, they feel would be racist, so they don't do anything. I saw that in my elementary school. My mind just went back there, and I went to an elementary school that was very diverse, and I really think what you're speaking to is happening there. It's this weird double standard where a African-American student could call a white student like, oh, you remember the KKK, like we're in the playground having a fight. But the white student would never use the N-word or something like that. Or if they did, they would be suspended and it would be this huge thing. Just a little example from my life. Yeah, where I saw that.
Yeah, it'll be things like that. And it'll be also like, like kids are like swearing and stuff like that. And again, if it was an environment where if these teachers were treating their students like their kids, they wouldn't be having it. Like, you're not going to talk like that. You're not going to do that. Like, I care about you too much. Like, I know how fucked up this world is and how it treats people that acts this way, how it treats people that don't project a certain I hate to say it, but it really class. And so therefore you're gonna get the wrath from me because I care about you too much to allow you to continue to go down this path. That's the love that you would get from a family member,
right? No,
somebody that really cares about you.
Yeah.
But when you're not that connected to these people, and you don't, maybe you just don't even care, you know, or you just kind of become jaded because you're kind of just dealing with something beyond your capacity to really deal with. You just let the stuff slide. You just let the kids, that's what these kids do.
Yeah.
Who am I to judge? I don't know. I can't do anything about it. And
yeah.
And that's the dynamic that I see often, and it's not healthy.
It's not healthy. It's a great point, and we've seen that with the looting and some of the political responses to it on both sides. I mean, you've got some politicians responding in ways that are racist, like Trump, like with his tweet about the looting and the shooting, and then you've got some politicians that respond in the way you're talking about, which maybe is also not helpful. Like, can we have respect and a functioning legal system without going to either of those two places? And then I've seen videos of, like, just as an example, like, I saw this video of a Rolls Royce, brand new, sparkling. Do you see that video? It pulls up, and all these guys, African American guys, jump out and loot the store in New York City, and they jump back into this Rolls Royce. And it's just like, man, this is unbelievable.
Now I'm going to search for that. That sounds good.
I couldn't tell 100% from the video if it was a short little video, but they pull up to a store, the windows are broken, some of them run into the store, and then the car drives off. But man, the idea was that there are these super rich people who are participating in the looting as well.
Was this on TikTok? What did you say it was?
I'll send it to you. It was on Twitter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a $400,000 car, you know? It's like the poverty. I mean, I think our race relations and economic system, it's so complex in the United States, and there's so many it's just complex.
Yeah. And, you know, at the same time, like, we can't gaslight the real rage and anger that African Americans have to feel at the system. Honestly, it is, again, there's justification. Like, if they, in many ways, I mean, I believe there's justification in just burn it all down. Like, I'm not even disputing that. The reasons I dispute it is because I think if my goal, well, I dispute it on two sides, right? One is on a moral level, right? What society do we want to create after this? What do we want the outcome to be? If we want the outcome to be peace and understanding, looting and doing that stuff, not good. And then I think about it on a strategic level. If Black people and the people that are on the side of justice and anti-police brutality had tanks and planes and overwhelming physical force to make the others to kind of assert their will, I would tactically on a strategic level say, well, yeah, it's a good strategy. You know, you're gonna overwhelm the police and all these people, and it's gonna work out for you. But that's not the case. Like, it's a bad strategy, and it creates a dynamic where, cause this is the thing, like, there's a lot. This is such a moment, a powerful moment. We have 54% of people in this country believe that it was justified for that police station to be burned down in Minnesota.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's incredible, right? That's crazy. So we have this moment where so many people have they get it. They see the anger, they get the anger, and they want to be with you. But you also have to keep in mind that there's a lot of people who can easily be kind of shifted back into like a more, I call these people kind of most Americans, I think, are more conservative when it comes to sort of like law and order, chaos versus
order.
Yeah, chaos versus order, right? They're sort of they're gonna side with like they'll justify the burning of this one police station. Okay, you showed your anger, but I think that a lot of people in this country are still more like I think about, you know, my mom, for instance. She understands the protest. She wants to support them, but like she looks at the looting and it's like, that makes me lose something. So part of my zeal for supporting this movement goes away when I see that.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And that's understandable, and that's where a lot of people are at, and we have to be aware. This whole thing is PR, man. This is public relations. You're working with not what you want things to be, but with the reality that is, and how public opinion actually operates. And
yeah, it's a great point, because the public opinion could turn against the protest, and they could be seen just as these rioters and looters, and then all the millions of people who peacefully gathered will be kind of forgotten about, and that would be a shame.
yeah. Dude, crazy. Can you hear the rain and shit in the background?
Oh no, I can't. The rainstorm.
Yeah, we're getting a nice little storm here. Yeah, you know, I think something that I looked into a lot when I was back in Europa and I was doing my research project on this issue. Is this idea of different types of capital. And two of the important ones that we should think about are social capital and moral capital. And social capital is basically like, I think of a celebrity, right? It's a person that has an ability to be seen, an ability to be influential, and people listen to you. You have a pulpit, right? The radical left, the people who support justice have a lot of that right now. And another type of capital, moral capital, is sort of like the capital that comes when people believe that you are on the right side of things, that you are just, you are righteous. And that's the type of capital that was being leveraged in the civil rights movement, specifically by people like Muhammad Gandhi or Martin Luther King. Their calculation was, if we kind of create these situations where it's very clear who the aggressor is and who the violent people are, public opinion is going to turn, and we are going to win just by virtue of being righteous. And those are important things to consider, and those really are the only forms of capital that the radical left has. It doesn't have anything else. So like, you gotta work with what you got. That's it. That's really what it comes down for me. You got to work with what you got.
Yeah.
If you had the tanks, you had the submarines, you had the guns, then you work with that advantage. I mean, I'm not an advocate of violence, but I'm just saying from a strategic point of view.
Right.
But if you don't have it, then don't fuck around with that. That's, you know.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think integrity is really important, and having strong leadership, and hopefully I think that these protests are really valuable. I hope they keep going, and I hope that there's more acts of civil disobedience that are not looting, they're not causing needless destruction, but they are kind of disrupting the status quo in some way. Maybe that means blocking off traffic, maybe, I don't know, but different things like that I think are needed. Otherwise people won't pay attention, unfortunately.
Yeah. Like, what do you think needs to, like, what would be like priority for you in terms of like what needs to change? Is it like different training for police?
Oh man. I'm
curious, like, what do you think?
I think there's a huge list, and near the top of my list is the corruption in our political system, which I think is massive. And I think that is happening on such a huge scale that people feel it, they sense it, but it's almost hard to see because it's so out in the open. It's become so normalized. And so when Joe Biden's son gets paid $90,000 a month or whatever it is for some Ukrainian company, like, oh, that's just the way we do things. When Donald Trump employs his family members and has diplomats paying thousands of dollars a night to stay at his hotel, oh, that's just the way we do things. People paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to join his golf club in Florida so they can spend time with him. The monitor is the public, so-called public servants are just doing everything they can to line their own pockets. And I think that is the number one thing that, I mean, there's a lot of things, but in terms of police, I think we need a massive reform. We need like a truth and reconciliation process across the whole country. The police need to be seen as public servants. I mean, maybe even changing the name, like taking down the police departments and creating a whole new system where you call these people to come help you. It's not just about cops and robbers. It's about helping the community. It's about, this person's having a mental health crisis. Can we have someone that we call? This person's been homeless for 3 years. Can we have someone that we can call who's not going to arrest them and shoot them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm with you 100% on both of those things. I think, yeah, the what you said about corruption is right on. I mean, and that's part of it. And part of what I think also gives a little bit justification to the people that are rioting. They're like, well, shit, like, you know, we're being looted as a community, as a country, you know, every day we're being looted in legal ways.
Right.
And also, we're seeing how the rich get away with everything, man.
Yep.
You know, like, I think, you know, even something like Epstein, you know, being killing himself, quote unquote, right? We see that. I think all of that contributed to the current moment. We're just seeing the elite. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard that one.
We're seeing the elite get away with everything, man.
Absolutely.
And at some point, you know, I wonder what would happen if, instead of looting and rioting, destroying like the businesses of local people and things like that in these cities, if these protests went directly to like the police officers, directly to the elite and a lot of the people most responsible for the situation we're in, I wonder how public opinion would shift too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it would be the same level of condemnation. I think that part of the reason people get angry at some of these protest tactics is like, well, why are you fucking making me pay for what's happening? Like, I'm just the business. I'm just the owner of like a 7-Eleven. I have nothing to do with police brutality. Like, why are you breaking my windows? And I get that, you know, like it does feel a bit unfair. So anyways, yeah, all that to say, I agree with what you're saying about corruption. I think that's a huge part that we gotta deal with. And corruption in the police department specifically, I mean, the fact that they can't be prosecuted, like, that's crazy. These people, you know,
it's insane.
And the things that are legal for them to do, tasing people and restraining people in the way that they do and approaching people the way that they do, unacceptable. We got to change all of that. So I'm with you on that.
Yep. Well, it's been great having you on the podcast. I'm gonna have to get going for now, but maybe we can have a follow-up conversation in a little while.
Yes, sure.
Perspectives.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me, man. And you know, especially at this moment, it's really important to talk about these things. So
absolutely
appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.com. eruption.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.